The chandelier above shimmered like a constellation, casting golden light across the velvet chairs and polished marble. Dubai's elite had gathered, oil magnates, tech tycoons, and political powerhouses, each one cloaked in tailored suits and silent judgment. At the far end of the table sat Ibrahim Traoré, posture straight, eyes calm. He was younger than most, dressed modestly, his presence understated but unshaken. Introductions circled the room, each name followed by a boast: net worth, legacy, empire. Then came his turn. "I am Ibrahim Traoré," he said, voice steady. "President of Burkina Faso." A pause, then a chuckle, sharp, dismissive. The Arab millionaire leaned back, swirling his glass of saffron tea. "President," he echoed, smirking. "Of Burkina Faso?" The room shifted. A few exchanged glances. One man stifled a laugh. Traoré didn't flinch. "I speak 9 languages," he continued, eyes locked on the man. "Arabic, French, Russian, Mandarin, English, Portuguese, Hausa, Bambara, more." The millionaire raised an eyebrow, unimpressed. "Languages don't build empires," he said, waving a jeweled hand. "Money does." Silence. Then Traoré leaned forward, his voice low but resonant. "Empires fall. But language builds bridges no wealth can cross." The room froze. A Saudi diplomat blinked. A European CEO leaned in. Even the servers paused mid-step. The millionaire's smirk faltered. And just as the tension thickened, Traoré added, in flawless Arabic, "Respect is not inherited. It is earned." The chandelier flickered. What happened next would ripple far beyond that room. The summit was billed as a gathering of visionaries, a place where power met diplomacy, where fortunes shaped futures. Held in the heart of Dubai's financial district, the venue itself was a monument to excess. Glass towers piercing the sky, gold-trimmed corridors echoing with the footsteps of men who believed they owned the world. Traoré stepped into the room with quiet resolve. No entourage, no designer suit, just a crisp shirt, a modest watch, and the kind of presence that didn't need embellishment. He was the youngest head of state in the room, and the only one from a country many in attendance couldn't locate on a map without help. The introductions began. A Russian oligarch boasted about his pipeline empire. A tech billionaire from California spoke of AI and global disruption. A Saudi prince listed his holdings like a grocery receipt. Each name came with a nod, a handshake, a subtle acknowledgement of status. Then came Traoré. "Burkina Faso," someone whispered, barely concealing the smirk. A European banker leaned toward his neighbor. "Isn't that the place with coups every other year?" The Arab millionaire, seated near the center, didn't bother to look up. He tapped his phone, glanced at Traoré, and muttered, "Interesting choice of invite." Microaggressions floated like perfume, invisible but unmistakable, the kind that didn't scream, but whispered, "You don't belong here." Traoré remained composed. He listened. He observed. And when asked to speak, he didn't start with policy or economics. He started with identity. "I come from a land where dignity is not measured in dollars," he said, "where leadership is earned through service, not inheritance." A few heads turned. He continued, "I speak 9 languages, not to impress, but to connect, because connection is the foundation of peace." The Arab millionaire scoffed, loud enough for the room to hear. But this wasn't just a meeting. It was a test of dignity, and what happened next would echo across continents. He was known simply as Al Mansour, a name that echoed through boardrooms and private jets, whispered in the corridors of power from Riyadh to Geneva. Born into a dynasty of oil wealth, Al Mansour had never known limitation. His childhood was spent in palaces, his adolescence in elite European academies, where he learned the art of influence, not humility. By 30, he controlled a constellation of companies spanning energy, real estate, and media. His face graced magazine covers. His quotes circulated like gospel among young entrepreneurs desperate to emulate his success. But beneath the polished exterior was a man who measured worth in net assets and dismissed anything that didn't glitter. Africa, to Al Mansour, was a continent of resources, not people. He spoke of it in board meetings as a strategic frontier, a place to extract, invest, and dominate. African leaders, in his view, were either puppets or rebels, neither worthy of a seat at his table. He had once publicly mocked a West African minister's accent during a televised panel, drawing laughter from the crowd and silence from the stage. His disdain wasn't loud. It was woven into his tone, his posture, his choice of words. When he met African delegates, he rarely made eye contact. He preferred to speak through intermediaries, often in English, even when he knew their native tongue. It was a power play, subtle but unmistakable. Al-Mansour believed in hierarchy. He believed in legacy. And most of all, he believed in the illusion of superiority, the kind passed down through generations of unchecked privilege. His world was curated, his circle insulated. He surrounded himself with yes-men, influencers, and technocrats who echoed his worldview. That wealth was wisdom, and status was virtue. He had never heard of Ibrahim Traoré before the summit. When he saw the name on the guest list, he scoffed. Burkina Faso, he muttered. What do they bring to the table? To him, Traoré was a footnote, a young, unseasoned leader from a country with no skyscrapers, no stock exchange, no global clout. He didn't bother researching Traoré's background. He didn't care that the man had led a revolution, that he'd risen through the ranks of the military with discipline and vision. All Al-Mansour saw was a mismatch. A billionaire surrounded by empires, and a soldier from a land he considered peripheral. This wasn't the first time he'd underestimated someone. Years earlier, he had dismissed a female CEO from Kenya during a pitch meeting, only to watch her company outpace his in East Africa within 2 years. He had ignored a Ghanaian economist's warning about currency volatility and lost millions in a failed investment. But he never learned. Arrogance, after all, rarely listens. At the summit, Al-Mansour was in his element. He arrived with a convoy, his entrance choreographed. He greeted the hosts with rehearsed warmth, posed for photos, and took his seat at the center of the table, the unofficial throne. When Traoré entered, Al-Mansour barely glanced up. He was busy texting a minister about a new oil deal. The young president's presence didn't register. Not until Traoré spoke. And even then, Al-Mansour's reaction was predictable. A chuckle, a smirk, a dismissive comment meant to entertain the room and reinforce his dominance. But what he didn't realize, what he couldn't see through the fog of entitlement, was that this moment would not unfold like the others. This wasn't another pitch to ignore, another voice to silence. This was the beginning of a reckoning. Because for the first time, Al-Mansour wasn't facing a subordinate. He was facing a mirror, one that reflected not wealth, but wisdom, not legacy, but earned respect. And the cracks in his confidence were about to show. Before the summit, before the headlines, before the moment that silenced a room full of billionaires, Ibrahim Traoré was a boy in Bobo Dioulasso, chasing dreams through dust and textbooks. His family lived modestly, his father a schoolteacher, his mother a nurse. They taught him that dignity wasn't something you wore, it was something you carried. He read voraciously, not just in French, the colonial language of instruction, but in Moor, Bambara, and Hausa, the languages of his people. By 12, he was translating for elders. By 16, he was tutoring classmates in Arabic and Portuguese. Language, to him, wasn't just communication. It was connection. It was power. He joined the military not for prestige, but for purpose. Burkina Faso was fractured, plagued by corruption, foreign interference, and a generation of leaders who had forgotten the people. Traoré rose through the ranks with discipline and quiet defiance. He refused bribes. He challenged orders that betrayed the Constitution. He earned respect not through rank, but through integrity. While others sought foreign validation, Traoré studied African revolutionaries. Sankara, Lumumba, Nkrumah. He saw in them a blueprint, not for rebellion, but for rebirth. He believed Africa didn't need saviors. It needed servants. And he vowed to be one. His linguistic mastery became his weapon. In negotiations, he switched tongues effortlessly, catching diplomats off guard. In villages, he spoke the local dialect, earning trust. In speeches, he wove together languages like threads in a Kent cloth, each one a tribute to identity, each one a challenge to those who tried to erase it. When the people rose up, demanding change, Traoré didn't hide behind protocol. He stepped forward, calm, resolute. He didn't promise riches. He promised respect. And they listened, not because he was loud, but because he was clear. His ascent to the presidency wasn't orchestrated by foreign powers or political dynasties. It was forged in the streets, in the barracks, in the hearts of citizens who saw in him something rare. A leader who spoke their language, literally and spiritually. He didn't just learn languages. He learned how to speak truth to power. And now, seated across from a man who had spent his life dismissing voices like his, Traoré was about to remind the world that fluency wasn't just about words, it was about courage. The air thickened with tension as the conversation turned from pleasantries to politics. Al-Mansour leaned forward, his voice laced with condescension. "Tell me, Mr. President," he said, drawing out the title like a joke. "How does one lead a nation with no global leverage? No currency strength? No legacy?" A few chuckles rippled through the room. Traoré didn't blink. Al-Mansour continued, "You're young, idealistic. Africa has seen many like you. They rise, they speak, they vanish. What makes you different?" Traoré's gaze didn't waver. He reached for his glass, took a sip, and responded, in flawless Arabic. "Difference is not in age," he said calmly. "It is in vision. And vision does not require permission." The room paused. Al-Mansour's smirk twitched. Then Traoré shifted, seamlessly, into French. He quoted Franz Fanon, speaking of decolonization not as chaos, but as clarity. Heads turned. He moved to Russian, referencing Dostoevsky's reflections on power and morality. A diplomat from Moscow raised his eyebrows. Then Mandarin, a proverb about humility and strength. The Chinese tech magnate at the table nodded, visibly impressed. English came next. "Leadership," Traoré said, "is not inherited. It is earned in silence, in sacrifice, in service." The room was no longer amused. Phones were lowered. Eyes locked in. Al-Mansour tried to interject, but Traoré wasn't finished. He spoke Portuguese, then Hausa, each sentence deliberate, each language a thread in the tapestry of his identity. The room wasn't just listening. It was learning. And then he paused. He turned to Al-Mansour, leaned in slightly, and spoke in a language few expected, a dialect native to the Arabian Peninsula, one rarely used outside tribal circles. It was the language of Al-Mansour's ancestors. Traoré said only one sentence. The millionaire's face drained of color. The room fell silent. But it was the final language that silenced the room. The silence that followed Traoré's final dialectal phrase was not empty. It was electric. It hummed with disbelief, with recalibration, with the slow unraveling of assumptions that had long gone unchallenged in rooms like this. Al-Mansour's lips parted, but no words came. His eyes darted toward the Saudi diplomat, then to the Chinese magnate, then back to Traoré, searching for a lifeline, a cue, anything to restore the balance of power that had just shifted beneath him. Traoré stood. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't pound the table. He simply began to speak, and the room leaned in. In French, he continued. Victor Hugo wrote, "La liberté commence où l'ignorance finit." Freedom begins where ignorance ends. A few murmurs rippled through the crowd. In Russian, Dostoevsky warned, "Power is given only to those who dare to lower themselves and pick it up." Traoré's cadence was deliberate, his transitions seamless. Each language was a blade, each quote a cut, not to wound, but to expose. To understand others is intelligence. To understand oneself is true wisdom. The Chinese magnate nodded slowly, his phone now recording. In English, Traoré said, "Martin Luther King Jr. reminded us that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." He turned toward the European banker. And in Portuguese, Paulo Freire taught us that education does not change the world. Education changes people. People change the world. Al-Mansour shifted in his seat. His fingers tapped the table, restless. His smirk was gone, replaced by something unfamiliar, uncertainty. Traoré continued. In Hausa, we say, "Matunsi yafai dakia." Honor is greater than wealth. The room was no longer a summit. It was a stage. And Traoré was commanding it with the quiet force of someone who had nothing to prove, but everything to affirm. He stepped closer to the center. "I did not come here to impress you," he said. "I came here to remind you." He looked directly at Al-Mansour. "You speak of empires. I speak of people. You measure success in skyscrapers. I measure it in schools, in clean water, in dignity." The cameras were rolling now. Not just phones, but official media crews, discreetly capturing what was quickly becoming the summit's defining moment. "You mock my youth," Traoré said. But youth is not weakness. It is clarity unclouded by cynicism. It is strength unburdened by entitlement. Al-Mansour opened his mouth, but Traoré raised a hand, not to silence, but to finish. You inherited wealth. I inherited struggle. You were born into power. I was born into purpose. The room was still. Even the servers had stopped moving. Al-Mansour's face froze. The phrase, spoken in the tongue of his grandfather, in the cadence of his tribe, landed like a stone in still water. It wasn't just a rebuttal. It was a reclamation. The Saudi diplomat exhaled audibly. The European banker whispered, "My God." The Chinese magnate smiled, almost imperceptibly. Then came the ripple. Phones buzzed. Hashtags emerged. Hashtag Traoré speaks. Hashtag Africa rises. Hashtag respect earned. Clips of the speech began circulating before Traoré had even sat down. Commentators tweeted in real time. Burkina Faso's president just schooled the summit in 9 languages. This is what leadership looks like. Al-Mansour just got dismantled with dignity. Traoré returned to his seat, calm as ever. Al-Mansour didn't speak again for the remainder of the session. And as the summit continued, one truth lingered in every corner of that gilded room. The most powerful man there wasn't the richest. He was the one who spoke for something greater than himself. It started with a single clip, shaky phone footage from the back of the summit hall, capturing Ibrahim Traoré's final words in the dialect of Al-Mansour's ancestors. Within minutes, it was everywhere. Twitter lit up. TikTok stitched it with reaction videos. Instagram Reels looped the mic drop moment with captions like, "This is leadership," and "Africa just flipped the script." The hashtags surged. Hashtag Traoré speaks. Hashtag Africa rises. Hashtag respect earned. Within hours, the video had crossed 5 million views. By morning, it was trending in over 20 countries. African youth flooded the comments. He speaks for us. Finally, someone who doesn't flinch. This is the energy we need. In Accra, students gathered to watch the clip projected on a campus wall. In Nairobi, a spoken word artist performed a piece inspired by Traoré's speech. In Lagos, a mural appeared overnight. Traoré painted in 9 colors, each representing a language he spoke. Commentators called it the most powerful moment of the summit. Political analysts dissected the speech line by line. Linguists praised the fluidity of his transitions. Cultural critics hailed it as a reclamation of African intellectualism on the global stage. Celebrities joined in. A South African rapper tweeted, "Traoré just made multilingualism sexy." A Nigerian author wrote, "This is what Sankara dreamed of." Even Western figures chimed in. A U.S. senator shared the clip with the caption, "Leadership isn't loud. It's clear." Al-Mansour, once the unchallenged voice of the summit, issued a statement through his PR team. It was vague, carefully worded, and conspicuously absent of apology. "I respect all leaders and their contributions to global dialogue," it read. But the damage was done. The internet had already crowned Traoré the moral victor. Memes exploded. One showed Al-Mansour's stunned face with the caption, "When you realize money can't buy fluency." Another depicted Traoré as a superhero, his cape made of flags from the languages he spoke. But beyond the humor, something deeper stirred. In classrooms across Africa, teachers played the clip to inspire students. In diaspora communities, parents shared it with their children as proof that their heritage was not a burden, but a badge. Linguistic pride surged. Young Africans began posting videos in their native tongues, tagging hashtag Traoré Challenge. The ripple effect reached policy circles. A Pan-African Education Summit cited Traoré's speech as a catalyst for renewed investment in indigenous language preservation. A university in Senegal announced a scholarship in his name for multilingual students pursuing diplomacy. And in Burkina Faso, the streets buzzed with pride. Murals, songs, and speeches echoed his words. "Respect is earned, not bought," became a rallying cry, not just against foreign condescension, but against internal corruption and apathy. Traoré didn't respond to the viral storm. He didn't need to. His silence was part of the power. The moment had transcended him. It had become a symbol of pride, of intellect, of Africa's voice rising not in anger, but in clarity. And the world was still listening. The interview was quiet, intimate. No grand stage, no flashing lights. Just Ibrahim Traoré seated across from a journalist, the weight of the viral moment still rippling through the world. He spoke slowly, deliberately, as if each word was chosen not for effect, but for truth. "Language is power," he said, eyes steady. "But dignity is the real currency." The journalist leaned in. "Did you expect the reaction?" Traoré smiled faintly. "I expected silence. I didn't expect resonance." He explained that the summit wasn't about confrontation. It was about presence, about showing that Africa's voice didn't need permission to be heard. That intelligence wasn't a Western export, and humility wasn't weakness. He spoke of his childhood, of learning languages not to impress, but to understand. "When you speak someone's language," he said, "you don't just enter their mind. You enter their story." The clip of the interview spread almost as fast as the original speech. Comment sections filled with reflections. "I've never felt so seen. He speaks like my grandfather used to." This is the kind of leader we need, not just in Africa, but everywhere. Educators began using the moment as a teaching tool, not just for language, but for character. Traoré's words became part of lesson plans, TED-style talks, even church sermons. The message was clear: never underestimate someone based on origin. Because origin is not limitation. It is foundation. In a follow-up segment, the journalist asked, "What do you say to young people watching this? Those who feel invisible?" Traoré didn't hesitate. "I say this: your voice matters. Your story matters. You don't need wealth to be worthy. You don't need permission to be powerful. You only need truth and the courage to speak it." The crescendo wasn't loud. It was layered, built on the quiet strength of representation, the kind that doesn't shout, but echoes. Across continents, people began sharing their own stories. A girl in Tunisia posted a video in her native dialect, saying, "I used to be ashamed of my accent. Not anymore." A boy in Haiti wrote a poem in Creole, ending with the line, "I am not small. I am spoken." Traoré's moment had become a movement, and in the halls of power, the ripple continued. Diplomats began requesting multilingual briefings. NGOs launched campaigns to preserve indigenous languages. A university in Ghana announced a new program, Leadership Through Language. But beyond policy and headlines, something deeper had shifted. The confrontation at the summit had reframed the narrative, not just about Africa, but about identity itself. It reminded the world that intellect wears many accents. That dignity doesn't need translation. That representation isn't a trend, it's a truth. And as the interview ended, Traoré offered one final reflection. "We are not defined by what others see. We are defined by what we choose to say." The screen faded to black, but the message lingered in hearts, in classrooms, in conversations. Your voice matters. Your story matters. He spoke 9 languages: Arabic, French, Russian, Mandarin, English, Portuguese, Hausa, Bambara, more. But the one that mattered most was dignity. In a room built to showcase wealth, Ibrahim Traoré showcased something far rarer: earned respect. He didn't raise his voice. He raised the standard. And in doing so, he reminded the world that true leadership isn't measured in bank accounts or birthrights, but in clarity, courage, and connection. This wasn't just a viral moment. It was a mirror, reflecting back the power of identity, the strength of humility, and the brilliance of representation. For every young person who's been told they don't belong, this was proof that belonging isn't granted. It's claimed. So if this story moved you, if it made you pause, reflect, or feel seen, don't let it end here. Be part of the movement. Share this story. Speak your truth. Subscribe for more voices that challenge, uplift, and inspire. Comment with your language, your pride, your journey. And above all, remember, you don't need permission to be powerful. You just need the courage to speak.